Warning: this episode contains references to child abuse, unwanted sexual contact, and intimate partner violence. Systems that are supposed to provide care may not have this information. Sadly, you might find yourself educating members of your care team on what ACEs are. Welcome to Living Life in Color Again, the podcast for anyone who has lost a loved one to homicide. I'm your host, Kimberly Christopher. Almost 10 years ago, I listened to a TED Talk that struck a chord so much that I have not forgotten about it. At that time, I was in a place of personal review. My family was young, and I was on a quest to become intentional about how I show up as a mother. I was also reflecting on my childhood in search of lessons or takeaways that would support my efforts to become a more effective parent. The TED Talk is entitled How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across a Lifetime, and the presenter is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. Dr. Burke Harris is an accomplished pediatrician and the founder of the Center for Youth Wellness in San Francisco, California. In her 16-minute TED Talk, she describes the science of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, ACEs for short. Dr. Burke Harris is the author of The Deepest Well, Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity. I just finished reading The Deepest Well, and I highly recommend it. Dr. Burke Harris does a great job of explaining clinical concepts with humor, language that's easy to understand, and relatable stories. Adverse childhood experiences refer to traumatic events that occur during childhood, such as abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction, which can disrupt development and lead to chronic physical, mental, and behavioral health problems, but can be prevented through supportive environments and interventions. Common examples of traumatic events include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, household violence, parental substance abuse, parental mental illness, and parental separation/incarceration. These traumatic events create a toxic stress response that causes harm in developing brains and bodies. Two key terms that I will use for this conversation are ACEs and toxic stress. Let's define them. Toxic stress refers to the prolonged activation of the body's stress response due to frequent or severe ACEs, which alters developing brain architecture, hormonal systems, and immune systems, increasing risks for serious physical and mental illnesses. The stress response puts our bodies in fight or flight mode. Prolonged fight or flight creates high levels of cortisol in the body, causing significant mental and physical health issues. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, refers to a list of 10 stressors before age 18, including physical/emotional abuse or neglect, caregiver mental illness or substance abuse, domestic violence, parental separation, and household dysfunction. So how do you determine whether you have had multiple adverse childhood experiences? Complete the questionnaire. I'll read the 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences, and I will make the questions available in the show notes. Place a check mark next to each ACE category that you experienced before your 18th birthday. Then, add up the number of categories of ACEs you experienced and put the total number at the bottom. That is your ACEs score. Before reading the questions, I think it's important to pause here and say that these questions ask about sensitive matters like child abuse, unwanted sexual contact, and intimate partner violence. If you are listening to this podcast at work, while driving, or in a public place like a coffee shop, and you think that your nervous system and/or past memories might be activated, then I urge you to pause here and continue listening once you're in a private place. Here are the 10 questions. 1. Did you feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect or take care of you? 2. Did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or other reasons. 3. Did you live with anyone who was depressed, mentally ill, or attempted suicide? 4. Did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or using drugs, including prescription drugs? 5. Did your parents or adults in your home ever hit, punch, beat, or threaten to harm each other? 6. Did you live with anyone who went to jail or prison? 7. Did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? 8. Did a parent or adult in your home ever hit, beat, kick, or physically hurt you in any way? 9. Did you feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were special? And 10. Did you experience unwanted sexual contact, such as fondling or oral, anal, vaginal intercourse, or penetration? These are heavy topics that may create multiple reactions. One reaction that you might have is anger. Anger about what you experienced, and perhaps anger toward parents or caregivers whom you felt did not protect you. I've heard therapists use the phrase, more than one thing can be true. We can love our parents and caregivers and also feel angry and disappointed in their behavior. My reaction after the first time reading these questions included relief and frustration. Relief because it validated that some of my experiences were in fact traumatic with long-term impacts, even if those long-term impacts were not obvious to me. Frustration because I didn't learn about this until I was 40 plus years old. So if listening to this episode is too much right now, please press pause and focus on your self-care. If you're still with me and you've completed the questionnaire, go ahead and add up the number of categories of ACEs you experienced and put that total number at the bottom. A lower score indicates the presence of fewer adverse childhood experiences. Lower scores are ideal. Conversely, a higher score indicates the presence of more adverse childhood experiences and therefore a higher risk for adult health issues, including chronic disease, mental health challenges, and social problems due to toxic stress. Higher scores are not ideal. We appreciate Dr. Burke Harris for elevating the term ACEs, but it's important to know that this is not a new concept. The term adverse childhood experiences was coined by researchers Dr. Vincent Felitti and Dr. Robert Anda with their colleagues from a CDC Kaiser Permanente study conducted between 1995 and 1997, which linked childhood trauma to long-term health problems. The findings were published in 1998 and established ACEs as a significant public health concept. This original study was done in a population that was 70% white, that's 70% white, and 70% college educated, 70% college educated. Of this population, 67% had at least one category of ACE, and almost 13% had 4 or more categories of ACE. That means 1 in 8 people had 4 or more ACEs. Moreover, a person with 4 or more ACEs was twice as likely to develop heart disease and cancer, and 3 times as likely to develop chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. So the threshold of what researchers consider a score that should be examined further is 4 or more. Anything above 3 is considered notable and worthy of an action plan to reduce toxic stress and foster good mental and physical health. For children, one key takeaway is that early adversity activated the brain pathways that are associated with vigilance, poor impulse control, increased fear, and inhibition of executive function. Identifying kids at high risk for toxic stress early enough to intervene is a major goal. Homicide loss is not a category on the ACEs questionnaire. However, Dr. Burke Harris acknowledges several other factors that she believes may increase the risk for toxic stress. Those factors are community violence, homelessness, discrimination, foster care, bullying, repeated medical procedures or life-threatening illness, the death of a caregiver, and loss of a caregiver due to deportation or migration. For teens, Dr. Burke Harris also includes youth incarceration and verbal or physical violence from a romantic partner. So here's why I wanted to talk about this. Many adults are in the process of healing old wounds and or reparenting themselves. I wanted to offer this information to add both a tool and some language that might help. If you're working with a care team that includes a therapist, nutritionist, medical doctors, etc., and you feel comfortable, you could dedicate some sessions to discussing your ACEs. Secondly, many of us either have interacted with or are interacting with professionals who don't know about ACEs, which creates a gap in care. A 2020 article in the Permanente Journal, which is a clinical medicine and healthcare delivery publication, says the following. Despite the impact of ACEs on health, physicians have demonstrated limited knowledge of ACEs. Of the 402 physicians and residents surveyed, more than 80% reported that they had never heard of the ACEs questionnaire, and only 3% reported using it in practice. Most physicians, 55%, reported no personal history of ACEs. So physicians are serving populations without full scope of their patients' childhood trauma, not to mention the adverse effects of those traumas. Systems that are supposed to provide care, physicians, therapists, even victim advocates, may not have this information. Sadly, you might find yourself educating members of your care team on what ACEs are. I share this information as a reminder that we have to be our best advocates. We have to equip ourselves with knowledge. I know it's tiring sometimes, and it shouldn't be this way. Having a community of like-minded people who share information is so important. Tap into the people and places who are offering up resources that can help. And the last reason why I am sharing this information, many adults are working to heal newer wounds like homicide loss, which represent additional layers of trauma. Many homicide survivors, like me, experience compounding trauma. Homicide survivors often already have a history of adverse childhood experiences, and homicide adds another layer, increasing vulnerability to the long-term effects. One of the things that I wrote about in my book is how my brother's homicide reactivated some of my old wounds, which made all of it feel heavy and impossible to navigate. So give yourself some grace when you're trying to unpack layers and layers of hurt, pain, and trauma. You might be thinking, I have had multiple adverse childhood experiences. What can I do about it now? While ACEs are harmful, they are not our destiny. Early detection and trauma-informed care can heal the toxic stress response. The answer? Look to our brains to help us heal by way of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to rewire or reorganize itself in response to stimulus. To quote Dr. Burke Harris, our brains are always changing in response to our experiences, and overall, that is a good thing. So what we should do is jumpstart the brain's lifelong ability to reorganize its structure, functions, and neural connections in response to learning and experience. But exactly how do we do that? Dr. Burke Harris answers that question. She says, 6 things that I recommend for my patients are sleep, exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, mental health, and healthy relationships. So even if your doctor doesn't know what ACEs is, you may be able to ask him or her for a referral to a sleep specialist, a nutritionist, or a mental health provider, specifically a mental health provider who is trauma-focused. I feel compelled to share more details around mindfulness. Mindfulness is the psychological process of intentionally bringing one's attention to the present moment without judgment. It involves observing thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they are. instead of reacting to them, which reduces stress and increases awareness. Examples include mindful eating, deep breathing, and active listening. Mindful eating looks like savoring the smell, the texture, and the taste of food instead of just rushing through the meal. Mindful breathing means focusing on the sensation of breath entering and leaving the body, especially when you are feeling stressed. Routine task awareness refers to focusing entirely on the sensations of daily tasks, such as feeling the water temperature while washing dishes or the sensation of walking. Grounding techniques are also touted as great ways to create mindfulness. Hugging a tree and walking barefoot on the grass are good ways to invite in mindfulness. By engaging the senses, feeling the bark's texture, smelling the air, and focusing on the present moment, these grounding techniques help lower cortisol levels, induce a state of calm, and foster a deep connection with nature. Because adults with high ACEs are at risk of health problems, Dr. Burke Harris also recommends working with a doctor to walk through your ACEs and your family health history. There is a field called integrative medicine that is dedicated to looking at the whole person and using the latest science to improve health and well-being. The general idea is the more you do all 6 things, especially adults, the more you will reduce stress, reduce inflammation, enhance neuroplasticity, and delay cellular aging. One of the things I reacted to was Dr. Burke Harris's note about nutrition, and I expanded that for myself to mean anything that I consume. What movies and TV shows am I watching? What kinds of conversations am I having during the day? What music am I listening to? And what am I reading? I noticed that certain movies or content affect my mood and interfere with my sleep. And sometimes my mood influences my snack and beverage choices. And if my mood is influencing what I'm eating, I'm probably not making the best decisions. I encourage you to zoom out a bit and think about if you can more broadly apply one of Dr. Burke Harris's 6 areas of focus in a way that supports your well-being. Before we close, I want to have a moment of silence for anyone who is mourning the recent death of a loved one to homicide, anyone observing the anniversary of a loved one's death, or navigating holidays and or the birthday of a departed loved one. May you find peace. May you find compassion. Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, subscribe to the podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube, and share with your friends. Until next time.